This is a Now Magazine podcast.
Hello and welcome to Now What? I'm Radian Simon-Pillay, acting editor at Now Magazine and your host for this podcast. This episode is part of our TIFF special featuring the team behind the Discovery title, This Place. This Place is a queer love story that stars Mohawk actor Devery Jacobs and Tamil-Canadian writer Priya Guns. It's co-written by Nayani, Golshan Abdmoulaei, and Devery Jacobs. We actually first spoke to Devery about the film when she was on our very first Canada's Rising Screen Stars cover back in 2018. And we followed up with her on the movie in our last podcast, which also discusses her work on Reservation Dogs Season 2. Well, now we have the rest of the This Place crew. Joining me for this podcast is Nayani, Golshan, Priya, and producer Stephanie Sonny Hooker, who all discuss the evolution of the film, what they all brought to this story, and the questions they hope audiences ask themselves after watching This Place about allyship and what it means to be colonized while benefiting from colonization. So have a listen.
Hi, everyone.
Hey.
So Nayani, I want to start with you because I mean we kind of had this exchange on Twitter as well, but might as well get it for the podcast. You are the first Tamil-Canadian with a movie premiere at TIFF, a feature debut at TIFF, and the pressure.
I didn't know that until you told me, actually.
I didn't exactly do like the research, but I'm pretty sure if anyone else made it, it would have hit across my radar.
Yeah, you told me, and Maya Bastian told me as well, who's a Tamil woman filmmaker from Canada as well. So you both told me, and I was like, okay, that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, we're just jumping right into the movie. Yes, you're the first Tamil-Canadian with a feature at TIFF, but the thing is, it's like, and I don't want to make this sound like I'm diminishing your voice when I say this, but I mean, there are very few films when I watch them that come across as a community-made film, right? You do feel as a filmmaker, it does seem like you're a vessel for a lot of voices that are coming together, and it really comes through in the movie, like all of these voices coming together. So talk to me about creating this movie that feels like it's coming from plurality of voices.
I'm glad that came through, because that's always been the intention. And I think even Kelly Boutsalis, being the programmer that invited us at TIFF, even in her description of the film, I think that came through as well. So I'm glad that message is coming across, because that was the intention. I mean, like the film itself is written by three individuals, by Golshan, Devery, and I, and it's been communal since the beginning. The idea came up, but what we see on screen is not what the original idea that kind of was percolating in my head for maybe a year or two. It's evolved so much because so many people have had their hands and hearts in it. I think something that took as long as it did between the three of us to write, that was communal, which had very difficult conversations and open conversations and vulnerability and sharing. And, I just said it to someone, like, Golshan, Devery, and I don't think we finish a text message or a conversation without "I love you." Like, there's a real bond that was built there because we had to share stuff so vulnerably. I mean, we were friends, Golshan and I, before, but I think that collective nature was there, and it was 3 going on 4 years right up until we shot. We were changing the script. So I think that's what shines through. And I think everybody that's been involved has had a hand in it. Everybody, Devery playing a lead and having written it, Priya coming in and like relating to Malay in very particular ways, Steph coming in as producer and relating to the characters in very specific ways, and everyone can speak to that. But I think everybody involved had some personal connection to the film, and I'm so grateful that it's coming across that it was a collective effort.
Okay, so then, let's hear from everyone else. And I don't know if you guys want to take turns jumping in, or if you want me to point at someone, but like in terms of like coming into this project, let's start with Golshan. I mean, you were there from the writing process. Like, what do you want to add to what Nayani's saying about that?
Yeah, just to add to Nayani, I mean, it was a really collaborative process. I feel like we were getting together every weekend. We even had like writing retreats where we would spend days together and just, really hashing out a lot of the ideas and planning them. It was a place of sisterhood, really. We developed a really deep bond with one another. And to this day, I walk away from this project saying my friendships that I built working on this have been a sense of comfort and just joy for me moving forward in life. So I feel, does that answer your question?
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
well, I mean, and I want to like, I mean, going around, it's like, so you were there from the writing process from the beginning, but then, so Stephanie and Priya, like you're coming into this to this thing that's shaped by them. But then, so what? First of all, what is like? I'll start with you, Stephanie. Then, like, well, who was on board first, Stephanie or Priya?
I think around the same time they came
On
on.
the same time.
Yeah. So talk to me about like, we'll start with you, Stephanie. Like about like coming into this project. How does, I mean, what did you notice about the kind of collaborative spirit of it? How did you absorb that? How does your own voice come through in this?
Yeah, so Nayani and I had kept bumping into each other on dance floors, and then made
Soca Fest? Did your boyfriend tell me it was a Soca Fest when we were at the
yeah. At High Power, which now doesn't happen anymore, but at the legendary High Power parties, Nani and I kept circling each other. And and then she told me she was working on this feature. When we eventually I slid in her DMs and was like, let's have dinner. And she told me she was working on this feature, and so I came on around as the production manager, and we got through principal photography as a indie film, which has always had full of all of its challenges and in the photography stage. And I think when Nayani told me about the film, because usually I produce, not production manage, I just wanted to be involved regardless of title, because as like a queer woman, you don't often see stories that are not centered in like traumatic queer relationships, like within their love, and or like queer relationships where their families are still involved in their lives. It's always about being, like cut off from your family and stuff like that. So it was really special to me to like read what Nayani and Golshan and Dev had wrote and connect with it in that way. And also seeing all these cultures that like I've grown up around in Toronto interacting with each other in a way that feels really honest to me, like, because that's what happens in this city. And so seeing that on screen was really wonderful, and I just wanted to be involved regardless. So we got through principal, and then now I'm producing the film, and we're just
Excited.
still acting as a community. And I was really grateful to Nayani to bring me into the project, because like Golshan said, like it's just been sisterhood sort of all the way through, and I've gotten even closer with Nayani and feel really comfortable with everybody else in the project. We all are always looking out for each other, which is really special. And it's never a like every woman for themselves sort of situation.
Well, so then let's toss it over to Priya. First of all, I mean, it's kind of a big task. You're now having to act opposite Devery Jacobs, who's been in this business for quite a while, and also you got like folks like Ali Moment and stuff. Like these are some big heavy hitters and stuff. I mean, so that just feels daunting. I would shiver and shake having to do this stuff. But then I mean, and again, I'd love to know what your relationship was. Did you have a relationship with this team before you came into this, and how did you? Sorry, I just hit my mouth. How did you end up becoming, part of this, like the star of this?
I auditioned, and I think they fell in love with my charm. That's what I'm going with. I have seen Nayani's work before, and I knew of Devery. For me, like, first of all, working with Devery is a very humble, beautiful, wonderful spirit. Just watching her on set, I learned so much through the conversations we had when there were no cameras. I learned a lot about everything. It was a joy and a dream. In terms of like community, so I had moved. I'm brought up in Toronto. I'm from Scarborough. Grew up in Malvern. Represent, right?
Wait, MT or Pearson or
Pearson?
Right.
Yeah. And I moved from Toronto in 2009, and I lived in different places. And I've always been a visible minority, where I obviously stand out. And so the question of home for me is something that I think about often, because even leaving Toronto, and every time I go back to visit, it always felt like I don't know if I fit here anymore. Working on this place was honestly like I say it was like a love letter, and it felt like a homecoming because it was the first time in my entire life. One, I was working with people who were Black, Indigenous, people of color, women of color, who were fucking queer as fuck, and you could be yourself and just be. And so I was in Beirut at the time, and I don't know if you know about the situation in Beirut. They've been going through a hard time, but if you are a dark-skinned woman, you're most likely seen as a domestic worker. So I was, dealing with that, and then going to Toronto, and then being welcomed and being loved. It just felt like every single person I spoke to and interacted with was pouring you could feel everyone was pouring their heart and soul into this project. And I never experienced that. And that for me felt like, you know what, this feels just right. And I trust Nayani, I trust everyone involved with this. I'm just gonna do my thing and learn from everyone as much as possible. So with working with Devery, for instance, it just felt so natural. It felt like, I know that she's this massive star, but it was like I was having fun with a friend. Yeah. So it was very beautiful. I'm so lucky to be a part of this.
Amazing. Okay, but look, like I need to go back to the beginning here. It's like, Nayani, you said that the original idea of this was very different from what it became, but I want to know, what was the original idea? Like, how did it develop, and how did it develop from there?
Yeah, I mean, the beginning was inspired by a question of family friend Darshika, who's also a language consultant on the film, because everybody is involved with the film. But she asked this question during the 2009, protests with the Tamil community here and globally, like, what does it mean to protest on Indigenous land? For land elsewhere that's been denied to us or stolen as well, and that kind of complication of land and protest. And so the original idea was I was like, maybe it's like two friends and one is Indigenous, and it was very naive, right? Like one is Indigenous and one is, I was saying Tamil at the time because I wanted a Tamil character in the film, and they meet and what conversations do they have. That was the extent of it, including the familial narratives, including the love story. All of that bloomed with the writing process and everybody else, like the other two involved with Golshan and Devery. So I was very naive when I first met Devery, and actually in the village in Second Cup for the first time. I was just like, I just want to make a movie about two friends. And she loved the idea and where it was coming from. And then we started talking. For the life of me, I don't know where Golshan joined. I've known Golshan much longer than the film, but she did. And we've always been talking about our, family, her experiences and her family's experiences as refugees, my parents' experiences. So that's been a conversation that I think is not unique to us. It happens in a city like Toronto, especially both of us growing up in Scarborough. And I think, in that process, things shifted. What it was a story of friendship became a story of more than friendship, of love, of falling in love, of coming of age, and the story of two young women from different communities became about their families as well. So that all bloomed and blossomed with everybody's input. People share. The opening of the film is Golshan's uncle and my dad's story is inspired by the stories of Golshan's uncle and my father directly. So, and there's parts of it that are inspired by Devery's family. And so it's very much, it became what it was because three people, added to this one idea of friendship, and through friendship, all of it came together, to be honest.
I didn't know you met Devery because of this. I assumed that she was a friend before this project, so to speak.
I was talking to friends about my idea, and Gavin Shepherd and Jade Lehoy are two people who are close to me. Jade is a good friend, and Gavin was one of the founders of the Remix Project here in Toronto, which I was part of in round 5, and now they're in round 20 something. And I mentioned working on this film, and they knew her, and they're like, you should talk to Devery Jacobs. And of course I had heard about her, Rhyme for Young Gals, and everyone was talking about her, and I crossed paths with her in similar community art spaces. But they're like, you should talk to her about it. And that's kind of the inception point of how we came together in a Second Cup.
Okay, interesting. And then so when I hear what you said about the core idea, is the core idea essentially that scene where Priya and Devery's characters are, what are they, smoking hookah and talking about how we've all been called Indians at some point and the British fucked us over? Is that the scene? Is that the original?
That line's Golshan's line. That's not my line. She can tell you about it. We contemplated that line for a bit, but that was my initial idea. Is two girls hanging out in Toronto, the party scene. All of that I wanted in Toronto. There's elements of it that I really wanted. Different locations in the city. If anyone knows me, they know there has to be a hookah scene. But that was very much it. Is just two friends, shooting the shit and getting to know each other and having really awkward, complicated conversations. Then it became a beautiful love story with a lot of other things.
Yeah. Golshan, I feel like you have something to add to this.
Yeah, I feel like at the time when we discussed the two characters' relationship, it was like Devery was falling in love and coming into her queerness, and so was I. And I think I was like, I think they should fall in love. I don't know about them staying together because I'm a little like, jaded in that way. I'm like, I want them to break up. But yeah, I started initially on the project because I'm a poet, and like that's my beginnings as a poet, and I would always send Nayani my poetry. And that element of poetry is woven into Gonista's character. And yeah, Nayani really gave me the space to like honor that part of myself and write poetry for the movie and kind of put that in the character. Also, poetry is so important to Iranian people and our culture. So yeah, I think that's all I wanted to add, really.
No, I remember that moment though when you said, like, I was seeing they're both like, they should fall in love. And I was like, okay, sure, like, yeah, I'm down for it, let's go. But it was really like, yeah, so love was happening, and so love found its way into the script.
So there's a couple things you said that I wanted to jump on. One of them, I mean, because I feel like I'll forget this later if I don't ask you. You mentioned like the party scene and stuff like that. Now I wanted to get into the kind of the visual here, because it's like, I guess everyone has a certain color palette or a specific glow, and it all seems comes together in that party scene where all the glow. Was that intentional or?
Yeah, that was a conversation. Connor Fisher, like one of the few guys, cis hetero guys on our team who, like really just listen for the most part, and like just, I remember my first meeting with him. I actually tried to get every woman of color to DP this film in the beginning in the city, and everyone was on jobs that I wanted, which is great. Like I was so happy people were working, but Connor came through. Our friend Trisha, who's an amazing Filipino filmmaker and colorist themselves, and recommended Connor. And I remember Connor read the whole script when he came to meet me at Moonbeam in Kensington Market, and had a folder full of references, and all of his references were my references. And I was like, well, I guess I'm gonna hire this white guy to DP our film. And I think he took great care. I also want to note Cheska, who is our lighting designer, who is a woman of color from the West Coast, did a phenomenal job. And I think the coming together of that camera team, but Cheska's lead on the lighting really did that. And I wanted Malay's world to be kind of warm, because it's her city. This is home for her. This is the only home that she's known. And for Gawaniosta's palette to be kind of cooler, because she's just left the res and she's exploring a new place, and she's finding warmth. And then those moments where they're together, those kind of colors come together to reflect like Gawaniosta's character really finding a type of home with Malay. So it was very intentional. And then there's a lot of like flashback scenes which have their own look to it, but everything was discussed ad nauseum. And then Connor also colored the film, so it was rediscussed when we got back to post-production and got to like work through it there. But it was very intentional all the way through to reflect what they were going through and their lived experiences.
Okay. No, and look, I mean, beautiful looking film.
Thank you.
So many feelings. And then now when you were talking about like, again, we'll go back to when you decided to make it a queer romance, right? Like, I mean, it wasn't initially, but it's like, I mean, I don't know if I have a question here, but it's like, talk to me about this idea of creating a queer relationship that all of a sudden becomes a site for what is the Toronto identity, or what is or unpacking identities, or like this give and take of identity. Like, I mean, there's so much. I mean, it seems like a simple relationship, but there's just so much there.
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Golshan speak to it, because I think Devery and Golshan really cultivated like the queer part of the story, for lack of better words. I feel like everyone's been marketing it as a queer love story, which it is, but it's also just like a beautiful love story about like family and lovers and two partners. Like, it's a multi-generational love story. But I think it being a site, I don't know if we really thought about it. I think the good thing is we didn't overthink a lot. We were just like, we want them to fall in love, that's happening. We want them to have these hard conversations, that's happening. We want them to have complicated relationship with their dad, that's happening. And then all of that kind of came together. So I think some of it was a bit of a luck, or like lack of like thinking about the audience really, and how it was going to perceive. And like, we wanted to tell a lot of stories, and then we had to kind of pare it down. And I think it's a lot of like what happens maybe the first time you try to write a movie, and some of the things that you don't think about in that process. But in terms of the I guess, queer relationship as a site. I don't know, Golshan, like I don't remember thinking about it.
I think we were just trying to be ourselves
Yeah.
and speak our truth and speak about the communities we've grown up and kind of into, right? And queerness is such a wide spectrum. However, you land into it. But I think for us, it was really about talking and speaking to our truth and our realities. And it wasn't about overcomplicating it either, or making it a point of tension. Like their sexuality or their experience is not going to, for us, it was important for it not to be a point of tension for our communities and the surrounding characters. Like that wasn't going to be the focus. So I think that was really important to get across. It's just a normal relationship in the city of Toronto, people colliding into each other, with really complex histories, as we all know, we all have, whether we're refugees or we come from, impacts of colonization. I think it was just about how all those things collide. And yeah, queerness is just a part of it.
But this relationship, I mean, it's like, and not to like, it's just, this is just beautiful relationship in general becomes this sort of metaphor for Toronto. And then again, maybe not intentional or whatever, but you guys are bringing all of these people are bringing all these different things into this relationship. And there's a collision course of family history and intergenerational trauma and different identities and all of these histories that sort of, I mean, and what I'm really getting at is like, this is now competing for Ultimate Toronto Movie because it's like the first Toronto movie that's really housing all of these things, and it's housing within a relationship, right? And like, just to unpack that further, because like for me, you talk about the greatest Toronto movies. I mean, usually, you could think of a Cronenberg movie, or you think of Denis Villeneuve's Enemy, and you think of The F Word, and I love these movies to death, but they're very white. And so now you're coming at, and then you'll have your different pockets of Toronto movies where, someone might make a brown Toronto movie or someone might make a black Toronto movie, but this is a Toronto movie. And I mean, Priya, you kind of touched on it. Like you feel like, you in Beirut, you're seen as a domestic worker, but you came to this production. And I don't know, like, I mean, like, I don't know if you want to jump in on like, what does it mean to represent Toronto this way in a movie on film? And anyone can jump on that.
For me, I feel so honored, so blessed, and so proud because, like, you've taken from. I haven't seen the film, by the way.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Spoiler alert.
I don't know anything. I just think it's just so natural. Like, it's interesting to listen to Golshan and Nayani talk about the writing process in terms of like the intentions or lack thereof or whatever. It's just so natural in Toronto because of the makeup of people, that these things can happen. Like, I remember asking Nayani, like, what is Malay bi? Is she a lesbian? She's like, oh, she's queer. It's not in the script, even that realization for her. She just is. So it's very much a film about almost being, like everything is. And because everybody is and are very comfortable in who they are almost, even though they're discovering and rediscovering and learning, I think it makes space for something that's very real and natural, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, and I think what you mentioned, like, like Steph said, like I met Steph, winding up on Steph. I don't even know her at some party bubbling in against the speaker. You know what I mean? Like, hi, it's you again. Let's dance. Like I think Toronto, that's the reason it's displaced, right? Like I think it was Golshan where it was like this play on the word displaced, of course, because people have been displaced to this land and people have just been displaced on this land. But Toronto being this particular kind of place where that, and cities like this where like things just collide. You meet randomly somewhere, you have a moment, you build a lifelong friendship, you build a love story. Like, I think that we wanted to capture that. And then also like growing up, Priya grew up in Malvern, like I think we all are Eastenders for the most part, east of Young, or Young and East, but you're growing up in schools and communities where you grow up around everyone. Like my experience is like being raised, like my Tamil parents, but like, my Guyanese friends and my Jamaican friends, their moms, like I spent, after school and weekends at people's houses. I went to church with my Filipino friends because I loved choir. Like these are like, this is what happens. I think, Arun's character who plays Malay's brother, Alex Joseph, who plays Malay's brother, Arun, he says like that one of my favorite lines in the film is like, this shit only happens here. And I think that that's that's like what this film is about. Like this whole story could only happen here. And I think people are fascinated by Toronto for all of the reasons, you know, big reasons, big pop culture reasons. But I think this gives people in a window into like what it's like when all of these stories collide. And that is us. Like, you know, that's what happened to all of us. We all collided at some point.
Yeah. Stephanie, is there?
Yeah, you can see me like, I think that it's also just a genuine representation of like what happens when women like us get to be empowered to make a film. This is the reflection of our own experiences. We all ended up on this film together because we had something in common, like, you know, all of our different ways we've been displaced, whether that's like the otherness of feeling queer or being the child of an immigrant or refugee yourself or child of a refugee. It's like all those things at some point come up when you see another woman who looks like you or sounds like you or is from the ends, and you can have a conversation that leads you back to colonization. and we all like kind of cross over there, and it's what makes us feel safe in this, you know, project is, you know, we can speak our mind and talk about what it feels like to be on set and look around and feel emotional, because it's a group of people making a movie that don't usually get to make a movie about subjects we don't get to make movies about. And I think that's why it really feels like this, is because, yeah, like on some of our pickup days, we had a moment where we all paused because a few people on set were crying, saying they'd never heard their language on screen before. And even though it wasn't my language, like that made me very emotional, because we are all sitting here experiencing this thing that is, you know, a first.
You know, I mean, it's okay. Like every time you guys talk, I'm thinking about a lot of different things here, right? And at this point, I think this is the moment. Like, you know, you're talking about all these different communities coming together. You're all feeling, you know, the sense of allyship jumps up between communities. And then now I'm going to hone in on Priya and Nayani here, because I want to talk about the Tamil community, because I don't often get a sense of allyship from the Tamil community, at least my generation of the Tamil community. We're all in our own feelings and our own issues, like carrying our own traumas. We don't think about what the others are going. We don't have that sense of solidarity the way I see it in your film. I don't like. This is why I'm so glad your film is the first Tamil-Canadian directed feature to be at TIFF, because it's introducing a sense of allyship that I don't think our community often appreciates. My most recent kind of example is we saw last year when, you know, Palestinians took Nathan Phillips Square and were protesting about what's happening there. Tamils didn't show out. Right? I didn't see that support. Instead, just a couple weeks later, what did I see? Tamils celebrating the Ford government for introducing Tamil Genocide Week in education schools right after Stephen Lecce said, I stand with Israel against this and stuff. So that sense of like, you know, that burning sense of like betrayal, in a sense, that where we don't see our allyship with people who have like mutual struggles. Talk to me about
that. I mean, I will say that, yeah, I think this is a big conversation. I will say
you knew it was coming. What do you think was coming with me?
No, it's important because it's what was the inception of all of this, right? My first sense of like politicized identity was the protests in 2009. I'll say that. Like I grew up hearing about what was happening in Sri Lanka, of course, a bit. My dad is loves to share everything, maybe too much. So, you know, I heard his stories of migration to a certain extent. My mom was very closed-lipped. You know, I think there's a lot more nuance and layers about like, you know, who had the most, I don't want to say who that struggles. I think there's caste politics, regional politics, class politics that come into play within diaspora that are a lot more complicated. And I think a lot of the conversations I wasn't having with my family were afforded to me because of those kinds of privileges. So that's also a conversation to be had. But I think the protest, felt really powerful. I can still remember that feeling of like that many times. I think it's the first time I realized how many people left that country to come here and exist here together. I do think that there is a lack of solidarity with other communities. I think that's the point of the film, really, is the point of like the initial conversation with Devery is like, what responsibility do we have to Indigenous communities here whose land we're on? Yes, we escaped and, you know, found some semblance of safety, and safety is a very complicated and complex word. And that could be a whole different conversation, but we found some semblance of safety, but on land that's been stolen, where violence is still committed, against the communities that this land belongs to. So I think like that was the initial kind of, that question kept running in my head that Darshika asked. And I naively at the time wanted to make a movie that kind of like looked at that and complicated that, and what does that conversation look like? I think so much of, and Golshan can speak a bit to it because I think she had a really interesting anecdote about her father and family's introduction to like Indigenous folks here. But I think so much of what we see of Indigenous folks externally around the world is exported, right, through cinema. And I think our first introduction to First Nations folks, or Indians, as they say, quote unquote, like, has been through cinema and been through media representation that has been really harmful. So, my mom's ideas of like, my mom didn't know when I asked her if she knew, like, that Indigenous people were here first, and it wasn't a European country, that they were also, occupied and colonized just like we were, and countless other places. So, I think that it was intentional. I think that I hope, like I see with a lot of younger Tamil folks, that there's a lot more beautiful stuff happening in solidarity and understanding. And I hope that this film, at the very least, begs the question of how can we be in better community with Indigenous communities as other folks. But Golshan, I think in the writing process that came up.
Yeah, I think we had to have a lot of difficult conversations. Like even that clip that's on the TIFF website of Malay and Gonista at the shisha bar, and that exchange that they had, it was really important for us to get that right, because we didn't want to feel tit for tat there. We wanted them to have a parallel of experiences with colonization, but also not compare it, so it could get tricky. But yeah, I think a lot of, not only Tamil community, obviously, a lot of communities who experience oppression themselves are not standing in solidarity with one another. And I think it's fair to say that not all oppressed people can also oppress, right? It doesn't mean that we are free of that and we are rid of that ability to do that to one another and ignore each other. But I think ultimately your question stands with capitalism and individualism. Like, we are here and we are all participating in a capitalist society, and that causes individualism and for people to have tunnel vision around their own interests. So I think I cannot have a conversation about oppression and colonization and race and lack of solidarity without bringing in capitalism and how that really works as a divisive thing. And even in the film industry, right, it becomes very complicated and really hard for young people to tell stories and make movies without having a conversation around how capitalism impacts that. Sorry.
No, sorry, I want to hear more.
Yeah, so I was raised by communists. Both of my parents are communist leftists, and so I have a very different upbringing than other Iranian people in the city who came here as PRs. I came here as a refugee in the early 90s. So my experience is very different, and I grew up being raised going to protests, standing in solidarity with workers. So for me, I see it a little bit differently, but as we grow and our movements become more co-opted and complicated by capitalism and by the liberal left, I think we're going to see more of this division and this lack of solidarity and a lot of black and white politics around who's right, who's wrong, who's going to participate in what and who isn't. And so, yeah, I think we have a responsibility to also not allow our voices to be co-opted. And I can go on about this for days.
I mean, again, you just made me think right back to my Ford government example, where it's like, here, let's placate the Tamils while we vilify these others.
I think yeah, I mean, I really hope that Tamil people come see this film. I hope that people from our communities come see this film, because ultimately it's also something that's not just supposed to be a reflection of them, but begs them to ask different questions about how we're participating in the society or how we're not, and what is our relationship to Indigenous communities. And I think I really hope people come and see it and watch it and actually ask questions, versus like, oh, it's great for representation. Well, what is representation if it doesn't, ask us to interrogate ourselves and ask questions and reflect? Like, I don't want people to just come to the movie and say, oh, it felt really good to see Tamil and Iranian and Mohawk people on screen and other people around them. I want them to come and be like, come and think and reflect and ask questions, and maybe want to go to a hookah bar or a bar afterwards and have a conversation and chat about it, So yeah, I mean, as far as the Tamil community concerns, I really hope that they look at it for what it is. I mean, I'm worried about so many things about how people react to this film. This is a film that crosses so many boundaries of what people expect a movie to be from, I guess, a Tamil woman filmmaker or director. You know, it's a queer story. I'm interested to see how Tamil elders react to a queer love story that involves a Tamil woman. You know, my parents are excited. Like, we've had a lot of conversations, and I think that's it. I think it's the conversation piece. Is like, you just gotta hope that this causes some conversations.
Well, Priya, the leg of this conversation started with you going, huh? What are you holding back?
Wow. Okay. There's so much. On representation, I think that's one thing that as creators of color, we need to be aware of, is that it's very easy to say, oh yeah, you know, we're on screen, we're out there. There you go. There's a Tamil, there's an Indian. But for me, what I'm interested in and what I think this film does is to force people to think and ask questions, like Nayani was saying. How does this challenge the status quo? That's what I'm interested in. How can we pick this apart and say, okay, how is this different from another film about some brown person somewhere else? This is about a Malay who is struggling with her brother. They're poor. They have to take care of themselves. These are real freaking stories, you know? And then maybe if anyone wants to dig deeper and say, okay, you know, do they have any other support? What exists? She's trying to do a master's. Can she even afford it? There's fucking OSAP. She's gonna be in debt forever. There's that. And then in terms of like the Tamilness, I think we have a very, I mean, this is not unique to us, but our history is very contested. Every single Tamil home is very unique and different. In our house, it was, you don't talk about the tigers, you don't talk about what's happened, we're here now. And of course, this comes with privilege as well. And for us, we see in Toronto specifically, I would say, there's different narratives about the tigers, about what's happening back home, about what needs to happen back home in order for there to be some sort of change. And I think that we need to collectively understand how our oppression, if I can call it oppression, or how our struggles are unique community to community. And someone who I'm very obsessed with, and I think that every Tamil person and every socialist should read, is Ambalavana Sivanandan. And he says so beautifully that we're about communities of resistance, of coming together, of seeing how we're all connected through what it is that we've been forced, what it is they've made us separate. So there's divisions between us, and what is all of that in terms of race, in terms of class, and us coming together as anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, and anti-racist. So
I'm gonna add one more thing, just like based on what everyone said. I think this film is really about complicating any sense of binary, right? Like my experience is different, and I mean that in all sense of the word. When I think about it, I think about like my experiences as a Tamil woman is so different from Priya's experience as a Tamil woman, is so different from my own cousin or my own mother. Like I think that this idea of uniform or singular experience doesn't exist, and I think so much of this film is about like complicating any sense of binary. Like, you know, nobody says in the film declares I'm a lesbian or I'm queer, or I'm just this, or, you know, you never see Devery's character Gonios to say I'm just this, or just like, I think everybody is navigating their multiple identities, and I think that's what we're all doing as people who are involved with this project. I mean, we all, you know, arguably could all call ourselves brown women, and we have very different experiences and very, very different histories. I think one of the early things I wrote was like complicating this idea of what brown means for me. That was a really important part of this film, and I think that comes across. And I hope that people watch it and they maybe have a little bit of a headache and they want to fall in love, and maybe they want to like talk to their elders, whoever that is. But I hope they walk away with lots heartache and headache and joy and faith, and maybe triggered into their own grief, maybe, who knows. But I think I want them to walk away with all of the feelings and wanting to talk about it and have conversations with whoever they love.
Yeah. Let's put that on the poster. I wish a headache upon you.
That's it for this podcast. Be sure to check out this place at TIFF. If you're not in Toronto, it will also premiere digitally for audiences across Canada. And make sure you check out nowtoronto.com for more of our TIFF coverage, which includes our cover story with the team behind Brother. And also stay tuned to this podcast because we have more coming with the filmmakers behind Black Ice, I Like Movies, and Women Talking. Until next time.